They say the scariest thing about owning a home is what you don't know. Foundation cracks, hidden mold, surprise repairs. But no one warns you about the nightmare that knocks directly on your front door, wearing a polite smile, then tries to evict you from the house you legally bought. It happened in less than 7 minutes. One moment, my wife and I were cleaning up after breakfast, still trying to adjust to the idea that we'd be new parents in a few months. The next, 3 sheriff's cruisers rolled up in front of our driveway with lights flashing but no sirens. Officers stepped out cautiously, exchanging confused glances. And right behind them, in a floral cardigan and oversized sunglasses, was Karen, our neighbor from across the street, speed-walking toward them like she had personally called in a national emergency. She pointed at our house like it was a crime scene. "That's the one," she said loud enough for the entire street to hear. "They're refusing to leave. This home legally belongs to my son." The officers paused, almost waiting for the punchline. But Karen wasn't joking. She wasn't confused. She wasn't mistaken. She was absolutely certain. She pulled out a manila folder thick with papers, waving it like a badge of authority. Inside were falsified HOA documents, fake transfer forms, bogus signatures, even a manufactured timeline claiming the home was promised to her son before we illegally intercepted the sale. She flipped page after page with manic confidence, insisting there had been a clerical error, a fraudulent transaction, and that we needed to be removed immediately. Removed from our own house. Then she delivered the part that froze my blood. She had already prepared a removal list of our belongings, categorized by room, as if the eviction was already official. Clothes, furniture, appliances, even baby items we hadn't announced to the neighborhood yet. Somehow she knew. And the officers, clearly uncomfortable, looked at us, then back at her, caught between the insanity unfolding in front of them and the possibility that something bigger was going on. But here's what they didn't know yet. This wasn't the first time Karen tried to take our home. The break-ins? We thought they were random. The utilities that kept shutting off for no reason? We blamed the power company. The tapping on the windows at 2 a.m.? We thought it was raccoons. The scratched messages on our back door? We hoped it was a prank. The shadowy figure standing near our fence line at night? We told ourselves we were imagining things. But none of it was random. None of it was accidental. And none of it was harmless. Because the moment Karen learned we were expecting a baby, before our own families even knew, everything changed. Something snapped in her. Something territorial. Something obsessive. Something that made her believe that our home, our future, our child, belonged to someone else. And now here she was, using police officers as pawns in her imagined property dispute, standing on our lawn, demanding we hand over the keys. So here's the question that started everything. How do you protect your home when the person trying to steal it lives right across the street? Before everything spiraled into police lights, forged documents, and whispered threats across property lines, our lives were simple, beautifully simple. My wife and I had spent years saving for our first home, scraping together paychecks, skipping vacations, and dreaming about the place where we'd eventually raise a family. When we finally found the little 2-story house at the end of Alderbrook Lane, it felt like everything was aligning. A clean inspection, a fair price, a spotless deed history, no surprises, no fine print. Just a warm, sunlit home with creaking hardwood floors, a fenced backyard, and enough room for the future we wanted. We were still settling in when we learned we were expecting our first child. It was the kind of moment people describe as life-changing, but you don't grasp it until it happens to you. The world shifts. Colors feel brighter. Everyday routines feel purposeful. Even the act of picking paint for the nursery felt like participating in something sacred. We felt lucky, maybe even spoiled, living in a neighborhood so quiet it didn't feel like real life yet. The community was tucked just outside a medium-sized town, a patchwork of tidy lawns, maple trees, and early morning dog walkers. There were no official HOA meetings, no dues, no signs posted about restrictions. But there was a culture, an unspoken expectation of neatness, order, and knowing your place. You felt it in the way certain neighbors stared a little too long, or how conversations paused when someone unfamiliar walked by. It wasn't hostile, not exactly. Just watchful. And no one watched more closely than Karen. We met her on our second day in the house. She appeared at the property line like she had been waiting, hands clasped in front of her, wearing a bright floral cardigan despite the heat. At first she seemed harmless, overly friendly, overly curious, but nothing alarming. She asked where we came from, what we did for work, whether we planned to make any changes to the house. Her smile never reached her eyes. They flicked over every part of our yard as if she were inspecting it for flaws. Her son, if you could call him that, stood behind her. A grown man in his late 20s, hands shoved deep into his hoodie pockets, head angled down. He didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't even look at us directly. Karen did all the talking, proudly describing him as my baby, my boy, my future. Something about the way she hovered near him felt performative, as though she were presenting him to us like a trophy no one asked to see. In the beginning, her intrusions were small. She wandered close to our fence when she thought we weren't home. She commented on our delivery boxes before we even brought them inside. She asked oddly invasive questions about our mortgage, our interest rate, even our closing timeline. Later, we'd realize she was fishing, creating a mental map of our financial situation as if it concerned her. Then the letters began. Not official letters. Not anything from a real HO. These were homemade notices, printed on cheap paper with generic clip art borders. They had rules we'd never heard of, restrictions on exterior fixtures, guidelines for holiday decorations, warnings about non-approved landscaping. At first, we laughed them off. We weren't bound to any HOA, and she didn't have authority. But she believed she did. She started dropping comments that didn't make sense. This house has always been meant for the right family. Some places have history. You can't just break tradition. My son grew up watching this street. He deserves something of his own here. Each remark left a strange aftertaste, nothing directly threatening, but layered with something unspoken. Something territorial. We tried to keep our distance, but it became clear she didn't understand boundaries. She wandered up our driveway while we were out shopping. We caught her looking through our side windows one afternoon. Another time, we found her standing in front of the garage door, tracing its handle with her fingers like she was imagining opening it. Utilities started acting strange around the same time. Flickering power, random outages that affected only our home, water pressure shifting during showers. The providers found no issues on their end. Packages went missing. A car idled outside our home at midnight more than once. We told ourselves it was just bad luck, normal homeownership frustrations. But in hindsight, all the pieces point back to her. The first real shift happened the day she saw my wife holding a sonogram photo on the porch. We didn't even notice Karen across the street, staring from behind her curtains. When she came over later that evening, her usual strained smile was gone. Instead, she looked possessive. Or maybe jealous. Or maybe something worse, something unbalanced. She didn't congratulate us. She didn't ask how far along we were. She didn't even pretend to be happy. She asked one question, voice low and tight. So you're planning to stay long-term? Something in her tone made both of us pause. It wasn't a question of curiosity, it was a question of challenge. As if our future endangered something she already believed was hers. From that moment on, her behavior changed. She began referring to our home with unsettling familiarity, calling it the property, the future house, the one that should have stayed in the community. She made comments about her son needing a stable place and how young couples don't always settle in one area. She watched us more openly. She walked slower past our yard. She commented on every small change we made. And every time she looked at my wife's growing belly, something tightened in her expression, like our family's growth threatened whatever fantasy she had constructed. We blew it off, brushed it aside, told ourselves she was just an eccentric neighbor with too much time. We were wrong, because the day she learned we were having a child was the day she decided our home no longer belonged to us at all. If the early weeks in the neighborhood felt like stepping into a subtle draft from a cracked window, the next months were like someone slowly prying it open during a blizzard. At first, Karen's intrusions were irritating, unsettling, but survivable. But once she learned about Emily's pregnancy, something shifted behind her polite smirk facade, like a door in her mind had unlocked, and we were suddenly on the wrong side of it. It began with the rumors. Neighbors who once waved from across their lawns started pausing, looking confused, even apologetic. One evening, our next-door neighbor, Mr. Hanley, quietly approached me while I was unloading groceries. He hesitated, then said, "Look, I don't want to get involved, but Karen's been saying some things. Something about you two having forged paperwork? That you bought this place through a loophole?" He winced as if repeating the words put him at risk. I laughed, reflexively, awkwardly, because the idea was ridiculous. Every document we signed had been airtight, filed, notarized, double-checked. But the laugh died when I saw the strain in his eyes. "Just keep an eye on things," he said before shuffling away. Within days, the rumors grew legs. Then they grew teeth. Whispers about title disputes, heritage ownership, improper transfer, and even cultural misunderstandings rippled through the block. Every lie came straight from Karen's porch gatherings, which grew more frequent and more crowded. And she didn't stop at gossip. A bright yellow paper appeared taped to our door one morning. Notice of committee review, unauthorized exterior modifications. The problem? There was no such committee. And the unauthorized exterior modification listed was front porch lighting inconsistent with HOA illumination standards. We hadn't changed a single bulb. When I called the HOA office listed at the bottom, the number forwarded to Karen's personal voicemail. A day later, a new committee appeared, Neighborhood Aesthetic Compliance. Then Home Safety Audit Group. Each issued its own warnings, its own violations, all signed with the same looping, triumphant signature. At first, I collected them like trophies of absurdity. But after the fifth notice, one citing inconsistent lawn height, despite me mowing the yard the previous morning, the joke evaporated. Then things began happening outside of paper. Our landscaping, new shrubs Emily had picked out, was mysteriously trampled one evening, crushed in perfectly straight lines like someone pacing back and forth. A sprinkler head snapped. Decorative stones went missing. And then came the utilities. The living room lights flickered on and off late at night, sometimes buzzing sharp enough to wake us. The water pressure dropped sporadically, never fully off, just low enough to be unsettling. A technician checked the lines and found signs of deliberate interference near the street access point. Emily cried quietly in the kitchen when she heard that. "Why would someone do that to a pregnant couple?" she whispered. I didn't want to say the answer out loud. Around the same time, Karen's son, who previously only appeared in fleeting, awkward glimpses, became a regular fixture. A tall man in his 30s with a soft, rounded face and a stiff, childlike posture, he lurked around the property lines like he was waiting for specific instructions. Sometimes I'd find him standing at the edge of our lawn, staring, expression blank. Other times he'd trail behind Karen during her inspection walks, nodding at everything she said with an obedient slowness that made my skin crawl. One afternoon, I opened our front door to find him 2 feet away, holding a measuring tape up to our welcome mat. He didn't speak, didn't move. Just stared at me until I closed the door and locked it. We started documenting everything: photos, videos, timestamps, written logs. But every piece of evidence only made the growing knot in my stomach twist tighter. Then the false police reports began. The first officer came for a noise disturbance. We were watching a movie on low volume. The second, a domestic dispute. Emily had been napping. The third, suspicious persons on the property. We were those suspicious persons. Every time, the responding officers were polite but visibly annoyed. "We have to investigate when someone calls," they'd repeat. Karen always watched from her driveway, hands on her hips, giving neighbors a look of smug concern like she was protecting the community from invaders. But nothing compared to the night of the break-in attempt. It was nearly 1 a.m. Emily shook me awake. "Someone's outside," she whispered. At first I heard nothing but the soft hum of the fridge and distant wind. Then, distinct, unmistakable, the gentle click of a doorknob being tested. Our motion light flipped on. Footsteps shuffled in the gravel near the side window. A faint tapping on the kitchen glass. Not strong enough to break it, just enough to let us know someone was there. I called the police immediately. While we waited, we sat on the floor in the hallway, Emily gripping my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. When the officers arrived, whoever had been on the property was gone. No footprints they could track. No forced entry. Nothing they could officially act on. But the way Emily trembled all night told the real story. The next morning, Karen was outside watering her plants. She made eye contact with me and smiled. Not friendly, not neighborly. A slow, deliberate smile that seemed to say, "They won't help you." The harassment escalated from covert to open combat. One Saturday afternoon, Karen assembled a small cluster of neighbors on the sidewalk in front of our home. There were maybe 8 of them, some confused, some hesitant, a couple clearly enjoying the drama. Karen stood at the front like a general addressing her troops. She announced loudly enough for us to hear through our living room window, "This property has a disputed history, and until rightful ownership is affirmed, there needs to be a community safety evaluation." Emily placed a hand on her belly, instinctively protective. Karen went on, "I'm doing this for the good of the neighborhood. Some people are occupying homes that were meant for others." A murmur rippled through the group. A few glanced nervously at our house, suddenly uncomfortable with the role they'd stumbled into. I stepped outside, camera recording. "Is there a problem?" I asked calmly, keeping my voice level. Karen held up a stack of papers. "We need you to vacate until everything is resolved. You're making things complicated for everyone." I didn't move. Didn't blink. "That's not happening." Karen's son stepped forward, shoulders tense, jaw clenched like a child ready to throw a tantrum. Karen put a hand on his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. The group dispersed after I refused to engage further, but the message was clear: she wasn't done. Over the next week, more official-looking documents appeared. One claimed our fence violated setback rules by 2 inches. Another accused us of harboring unauthorized equipment, a child's soccer ball Emily had bought early for the baby. Then came the final escalation of the rising action, the moment every fear crystallized into something real. A patrol car rolled slowly up to our driveway early one evening. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting casually near their belts. Karen walked behind them, dressed in a crisp blouse, clutching a thick manila folder to her chest like it carried divine truth. Emily grabbed my hand, whispering, "What now?" What did she do now? The officers approached with measured seriousness. "Sir, ma'am," one said, "we received documentation regarding a potential property title issue. We need to talk to you about this." Karen stepped forward, her son looming behind her like a shadow. She held up the manila folder with a triumphant little smirk. "This house," she announced, "belongs to my son. And you need to leave immediately." And with that, the entire nightmare tipped into something far darker than harassment. It became a full-blown war. The officers stood on our porch, flipping through Karen's thick manila folder as she hovered behind them, vibrating with a poisonous blend of triumph and impatience. Her son stayed planted on the walkway, shifting side to side, hands curled into unsure fists, staring at the front door like he expected it to open itself. The officer on the left cleared his throat and tapped a page. "Ma'am, the formatting on these forms looks unusual. There's no county seal, no filing number." Karen leaned forward sharply. "It's a copy, obviously. The originals are in processing. You people never understand procedure." The officer ignored her tone, flipping to the next sheet, an ownership transfer document typed in 3 fonts, signed only by Karen. His eyebrows pinched. "You filed this? You alone?" "Yes," she snapped, "as acting representative of the Heritage Restoration Committee." The second officer looked up. "The what?" Karen lifted her chin. "A recognized subdivision oversight board." "It doesn't exist," I said, stepping forward with my phone already pulled up. "None of her committees do. She made them up." She whirled toward me. "Please, all of it. These people," she gestured at us like we were rats she trapped, "obtained this home illegally. Ask anyone." Instead of arguing, I tapped my phone and pressed play. The video started with grainy nighttime footage from our side yard camera. Karen's son, clearly, unmistakably him, kneeling beside the electrical box with a tool in hand. Another angle showed him shaking the back gate until the latch snapped loose. Another clip, him dragging his shoe across our flower bed, stamping over Emily's hydrangeas. The officers watched the footage with stony faces. Karen watched it with growing panic, her breath quickening, her fingers twitching like she might reach out and swat the phone from my hand. "That's taken out of context," she hissed. Next, I handed the officers a folder of printed screenshots, timestamps of her fake committee's warning letters, all created within minutes of each other, all from her IP address. Photos of vandalism, scratched windows, missing stones, and neighbors' text messages describing her porch meetings. But it was the final piece that detonated the moment. From behind me, a voice said quietly, "I have something too." It was Mr. Hanley, normally soft-spoken, conflict-avoidant, the last person you'd expect to get involved. But now he stepped onto the porch, phone in hand, visibly shaking. "I didn't want to at first," he said, refusing to look at Karen. "But people deserve to know." He handed his phone to the officers. On the screen was a group chat. Karen's name at the top. Message after message after message. "Start filing noise complaints tonight. Tell the board you saw them trespassing. My son deserves that house. Help me build a case. Ruin their inspections. Make them uncomfortable enough to move. The pregnant one will break first." When the officers scrolled to that last message, Emily's hand flew to her stomach. One of the officers clenched his jaw. Karen lunged at Mr. Hanley. "You traitor! You disgusting weak!" The officers held her back. But she wasn't done. Not even close. "This is a setup," she screamed, twisting, trying to break free. "It's all doctored. They edited it. They conspired. You're all trying to steal from us." She tried to grab the officer's clipboard, tried to rip the evidence out of his hands, but he pushed her back firmly. Her son started pacing in frantic circles, mumbling, "Mom, Mom," voice rising like a child lost in a crowd. The officers exchanged a look, the quiet, decisive kind that said, "This is over." "Ma'am," one said slowly, "you need to calm down." Karen snapped her head toward Emily, eyes burning with something wild and unhinged. "You," she snarled, pointing with a trembling finger. "You're the problem. You took what belonged to my family. You don't get to live here. You don't get to raise." She stepped forward, closing the distance too fast. Emily flinched back instinctively, and in that split second Karen lunged, full body weight, arms out, like she meant to shove her, tear the phone away, or worse. The officers grabbed her mid-swing. "Enough," the lead officer barked. Karen screamed, a raw, broken, animal sound, as they pulled her arms behind her back. "Let me go. This is my neighborhood. This is our house. This is rightful ownership." Her son made a run for the street, an awkward, stumbling sprint, but two neighbors stepped in to stop him, holding him until an officer guided him aside for questioning. Karen thrashed so violently the officers had to brace her against the cruiser before securing the cuffs. Her hair was wild, her blouse wrinkled, her face twisted in disbelief that her empire had crumbled in her own driveway. She kicked the door of the police car as they lowered her inside. "I will get it back," she screamed. "All of it. You can't steal from us. You can't. The door slammed shut. For a moment, the street fell silent. No wind. No traffic. Just the soft static of neighbors finally exhaling. And as her screams echoed down the street, the whole neighborhood finally saw the truth. This wasn't entitlement. It was obsession. When the cruiser carrying Karen finally pulled away, the street didn't erupt in celebration. There were no cheers, no triumphant applause, no neighbors waving victory flags. What filled the neighborhood instead was something deeper, quieter, heavier, the kind of silence that follows a storm that nearly destroyed everything in its path. Within an hour, officers were back at our door, this time with notebooks instead of tensions. They sat with us at the dining table, still cluttered with baby shower invitations and half-finished nursery plans, and took full statements. They asked about the vandalism, the break-in attempt, the property damage, the falsified documents, the harassment, the fake committees, the fabricated ownership transfer. Every detail mattered now. Every timestamp, every camera clip, every neighbor message. By the time the sun dipped below the rooftops, Karen's case had dissolved completely. The officers had already notified the county, the real HOA president, and the district attorney's office. What began as a messy, confusing confrontation had crystallized into something unmistakable, a calculated campaign built on lies, manipulation, and entitlement so extreme it crossed into criminal territory. Within 48 hours, official charges were drafted. Harassment, filing false police reports, stalking, conspiracy to commit property theft, attempted break-in, tampering with utilities, and perhaps most damning, child endangerment, tied directly to the moment she lunged toward Emily. Her son didn't escape the fallout either. While his mother faced the brunt of the charges, he was held accountable for the recorded trespassing, vandalism, and utility tampering. He wasn't arrested, but he was ordered into mandatory psychiatric evaluation and community service. It became painfully clear he was never the mastermind, just a grown man raised to believe the world owed him everything, shaped by a parent who never allowed him to face consequences. His life didn't collapse in handcuffs, it simply collapsed under the weight of reality. As for Karen's followers, the small circle she'd whipped into a frenzy with promises of protecting property values and restoring rightful ownership, they scattered immediately. One by one, they came forward, each insisting they didn't know the whole story. Some deleted their group chats. Others quietly mowed their lawns, pretending none of it ever happened. A few apologized, awkwardly, uncomfortably, admitting they'd believed Karen because she said things confidently, forcefully, with an authority she never actually had. Abusers of power often hide behind that mask, certainty. The Real HOA board issued a formal community-wide statement within the week. It included a detailed breakdown of our purchase records, the county filings, and a paragraph highlighting that we were the sole legal owners of the property and had been targeted by fraudulent activity by an individual not affiliated with the board. The county added its own statement, condemning the falsified committee documents and affirming that Karen had no authority, ever, to speak on behalf of any governing body. Police even returned to interview neighbors who'd witnessed her porch gatherings, asking for testimony to help strengthen the case. The truth wasn't just out, it was spreading. For the first time in weeks, we slept through the night. No footsteps scraping the driveway. No tapping on windows. No cars idling near the curb. No suspicious shadows slipping through the side yard. The cameras stayed quiet. The house stayed still. The air felt lighter, as if the walls themselves had unclenched. And for the first time in months, we weren't afraid to step outside. What followed was something we never expected. The neighborhood shifted. People who had watched from a distance now approached with remorse in their eyes. They helped replace our damaged fence panels. They trimmed the hedges Karen had destroyed. They offered meals, gift cards, baby clothes, small gestures, maybe, but meaningful ones. Mrs. Patel, who had witnessed Karen photographing our windows at night, brought over a hand-woven blanket for the baby. The Hanleys invited us to their backyard barbecue, something they'd never done before. 2 teenagers from down the block volunteered to repaint the mailbox Karen had vandalized. It wasn't guilt, exactly. More like the neighborhood had woken up from a long sleep and realized what it had allowed to grow unchecked. One person's entitlement morphing into community-wide fear. As weeks passed and court dates loomed, the story of what happened, our story, spread far beyond our cul-de-sac. Local news ran a segment. A legal advocate group reached out offering support. Even the county commissioners sent a letter acknowledging the unsettling mixture of personal entitlement and procedural exploitation. And in the middle of all this, life kept moving forward. Emily's belly grew. The nursery took shape. The baby shower finally happened, with neighbors showing up not out of obligation, but out of genuine warmth. Somewhere in the chaos of repairing drywall, reinstalling security lights, and organizing witness statements, we rediscovered something we'd almost forgotten during those months of fear. This house was supposed to be our beginning. Not a battleground. Not a proving ground. Not the object of a stranger's obsession. A beginning. Karen's trial eventually became a quiet, orderly process. A far cry from the unhinged spectacle she'd made on our front lawn. She pleaded not guilty, of course, but the evidence was overwhelming. The paper trail alone told a story she could never outrun. The group chat screenshots sealed the rest. She received time, shorter than some wanted, longer than others expected, but enough to mark a clear line in the sand. Enough to state, publicly and decisively, that what she did wasn't a misunderstanding or a dispute. It was a crime. And when the sentence was read, I felt something loosen inside me. Not celebration. Not revenge. Just release. We brought our daughter home on a sunny morning in early spring. When we carried her through the front door, everything felt different. Safer. Warmer. Ours. Truly ours. And the neighborhood? It still isn't perfect. No community ever is. But it's quieter now. More aware. More willing to speak up when something feels wrong. If there's one thing this entire ordeal taught us, it's this. Entitlement becomes dangerous when no one challenges it. Delusion becomes power when people stay silent. And home becomes fragile when someone decides they deserve it more than you do. So let me ask you, if someone decided your home didn't belong to you, how far would you go to defend it?